So within the modernist era of philosophy, there's this big obsession with overarching movements, many of which I'm sure you've heard of. For an example, there's the idea that there's this overarching curve to history of it moving towards freedom. Another is science, right? This idea that science is a force for good that will liberate us and create all these good things. Of course, later on you get the postmodernists who come along and say a lot of things that are contradictory to this, saying that you can't really organize history like that, and that, you can't find a trend in one direction. There's no end point where all of this moves towards one thing. I find myself more in that second camp. I don't think that these often ring to be true. Look at science, for example. Yes, science has led to great progress, but there's also nukes and AI that's a huge threat. And, I think its capacity to destroy can be just as great as its capacity to build good things. But that aside, I do think this idea of overarching narrative is really interesting. I think that it, despite its flaws, does have value in telling us what happened in the past and organizing it in a way that helps you place things, right? It almost like, when you are doing those graphs where you have all the dots everywhere, and then I think that they're called scatter plots or whatever, and then you gotta draw the line of the correlation. I think these overarching narratives are really good at being that line, and then as you learn more, you can place those dots and realize, okay, maybe this line isn't the most accurate, right? I think, too, these are, whilst more false in this regard, fun, because I think they can help us predict what's going to happen, right? If we believe, for an example, that history has a overarching arc towards the most free state ever, then imagine the most free thing you can, imagine the most free society, and you'd go, okay, that's what it's going to look like in 1,000 years. That's what humanity will look like. Again, of course, this is an inaccurate model, but I think a fun one nonetheless. I think it can be bad to apply this to things like history, by the way, because I think this leaves... I don't know, I think it's almost too important of a subject to, right? I think for me, or not me, because I'm not a historian, but I think for a historian to write something on, this idea of history that is kind of inaccurate could lead to a little bit of almost functional disinformation, but I think this could be really fun for art. I think there's one lens in specific, which I've thought about this a good amount, that once again, I don't think is accurate or will tell us where we're going in the future, but could be fun and could kind of cut to the core of some of these trends throughout art. Back to this idea of drawing the line in the scatter plot that might not hit every point, but is interesting nonetheless and can tell us something still, right? And what I really want to say here is there a possibility that there is a trend in all of art, all of artistic history, towards the most pure form of expression, right? We've discussed in great detail on this show how thoughts are not linear, they're not 2D. A lot of the most profound is a little bit crazy, but we've all thought a thing or two that we're like, wow, that's crazy, right? A lot of these thoughts, these big aha moments, come to you in these very abstract, pure ways, right? When you had the epiphany of deciding what you're going to do with your life or where you want to go in the future, I doubt that it came to you in the form of, I'll do this, then this, then this, then this, right? It kind of comes to you in this big jumbled ball, and then you, over time, as you think about it more, I guess, kind of sort it out, right? I think there's an argument to be made, an argument that could fill up an entire episode itself, but I'm kind of going to use here as an assumption that this abstract thought is the purest form of expression, right? That when having this very disorganized, pure thought that is almost a mix of emotions and logic and intuition, this is the purest form you will ever be facing of your own thought, of your own imagination, right? I think that there's a lot to unpack there on what does pure form mean, what is truth. You have a lot to go to there, but I do think that there's something special about it nonetheless, and I can at least feel that in my own head, these are the pure forms of what I think. So when you go back in time, right? I'm going to use painting as an example here, because I think that its movements are fairly easily categorized. I think when you go back in time to, let's say, late 1800s, right? Painting is still largely in a realistic zone. You can only express things in the, portraiture and architecture. Painting very much exists in this lens. Not completely, but you're yet to really face abstraction. Then the camera comes along, and that makes everybody be like, okay, well, if that can do the portraits, we're gonna go paint rough, expressionist things, right? This is where you get expressionism, early abstraction, all these things. Once you move further into this era, people are not just using abstraction as a new interesting way to paint, but as a way to express emotions that they couldn't before. I'm moving way forward in history here, but Jackson Pollock is a great example of this, right? When Jackson Pollock throws paint on a canvas in this splattered form, despite maybe its lacking visual appeal for some people, he is expressing an emotion in a very visceral way, sometimes in a very literal way too, with the physicality of splashing that paint on the canvas. There's emotion in that, if I'm sad and I go like that to splash some paint on something, it's very different than if I'm angry and I go like that, right? The paint's gonna look different. And I think there's an argument to be made that you can feel that difference if you really look at one of those paintings. So, we've gone from these portraits that are beautiful still. I'm not somebody that doesn't like early art, or not early art, but more realistic art. I'm not a hater of realism, but I do think that they, they use a rubric to express things, oftentimes. They oftentimes take a feeling or an emotion or a moment, and you kind of got to feed it through a machine to paint it in what was deemed to be the appropriate way. And then you fast forward 50, maybe even 100 years, and you're getting this art that is able to express emotions that doesn't need to be dissected, but is perhaps more appropriately felt. I think that one of the big holes in how this works is that there really isn't... I think that we're really great at putting down emotions onto canvases, into words, into music. I think it's genuinely incredible the way especially some artists can do it. I don't think that we have a perfect way yet to consume that though, right? In order to fully understand a piece of art, when it's in this abstract form, in this sort of experimental state we're talking about, of this very pure form of emotion, you need to feel it and think through it and use a little bit of your subconscious and let it kind of take you there. And sometimes that just doesn't happen. Sometimes it's hard to do. And I feel like that's an imperfection here. But moving forward, I want to talk about photography, right? Because you get photography happening in the early 20th century, very early 20th century, and that changes painting. Because now that this can basically do portraiture for people, they can do abstraction, as we just said, right? Coming now into the year 2025, we're at a place where AI is almost about to do the most traditional forms of photography, right? If you feed it a style, if you feed it an idea, it can basically give you what you need, in the same way that snapping that would make people go, oh, this is a portrait, I don't need to go paint a portrait. I think there's going to be many people that, as much as AI will not replace all the artists, I think there's going to be a good swath of them who do more traditional forms of photography, maybe professional portraiture, that do go away, because you could just take a photo on your iPhone and maybe hit AI enhance soon and it will look professional, right? Fully professional. Will this lead to a movement where the photography that comes out of the early, let's say this happens in 2050, is when we're fully there, where it's photography in its most traditional form is kind of outdated because of this new technology. Something that I do believe would be unfortunate, by the way. I almost do still wish that we were in almost more of these fundamental forms where more skill needed to be applied to things, and there was less automation. But that's a whole other conversation. Will this lead to a movement similar to painting where expressionist photography becomes the new use case for photography, where it is less about how you can frame a photo, how you can make the lighting work, the technique work, and solely about, whoa, just dropped a brush, guys, solely about, can I feel this photography? Is that possible? Maybe, I don't know. If we're going to go off this assumption that the way that art moves throughout history is towards this great trend of being in its more pure forms of expression, then the answer would be yes for everybody. The answer would be yes. Photography will move to its more pure forms. I want to touch back on AI for a second, though, because as much as there's great controversy around the medium that I think will fade away as it progresses, I do think there's something interesting about how AI works, right? Because it's removed a ton of the gap from going from straight idea to being physical, right? I've seen a lot of people online be able to, I think memes are a great example of this. AI photos are perhaps mostly being used for memes right now. And because of that, I think it's very interesting seeing how I have this idea for a meme of Donald Trump eating a burger can now go from in your head to in reality in 10 seconds, whereas in the past, that would maybe just exist in your head because nobody's commissioning a $20 picture of that happening, you know what I mean? So unless it was an artist thinking of it, it's just gonna stay in the head of whoever's coming up with it, right? So since this can now happen because of AI, are we going to see, with this technology, once again, a trend towards just pure idea being what's valuable? Is that what this technology's ultimate use case is going to be in the art world? Is like, this is now taking it from a place where skill is no longer even a thing. It's all about vision, it's all about expression, it's all about how much you can feel and how much you can make other people feel with your ideas. I don't know. And we're at such an interesting point of this, because like we are at a huge precipice of everything is about to change. Like there is very little about art that's gonna look the same by the end of this year, let alone in 10 years, let alone in 20 years, right? Because of these new technologies. And I wonder what that trend is gonna take. Is it just going to be that a lot of more traditional studio photography is unfortunately put out of business? Is that gonna be it? I don't know, I think that feels small. I think it's gonna be bigger than that. Will it be as big as a new movement of photography? Maybe. Will it be even bigger, of a whole new movement of the only thing that's valued is now vision? Maybe. But I think almost that looking at these trends of how we've gone from the most traditional forms of art to these more expressionary forms, it's hard for me to look at these new technologies and believe they don't have some sort of place within that context. You know, if this scatter plot is everywhere and there is the idea of going from portrait painting to expressionism with the camera, I do also believe that moving from skill being a huge thing to just vision and ideas is also directly on that line. There are other lines there too that need to be discussed though, and I think that's why this is a very imperfect way of doing it and just a thought experiment at the end of the day. This is the painting. Yeah, still nothing to say about these. Go follow the Instagram, there'll be up later this week. Let me know your thoughts on this. Do you see any large trends in art over history? And until next time, guys, gals, and pals, my name is Max Dice. This has been Paint and Talk episode 176. Or 5? No, 176. I'm here every morning, painting and talking with you all.